Well, hello and welcome everyone to our latest Building Bridges session. I'm Allie Brown. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at ASCP, and I am your co-moderator for today.
And I'm Dr. Rodney Rohde, Regents Professor and Chair of the Texas State University MLS program and fellow co-moderator with Dr. Brown. As a reminder, this series is being launched in collaboration with the CDC as part of the One Lab initiative in order to highlight stories of collaboration and partnerships that have addressed laboratory workforce challenges.
We'd like to acknowledge that this resource was made possible by funding from the CDC. However, ASCP is solely responsible for its content, and the viewpoints shared do not necessarily represent those of CDC.
Today's session will feature 3 fantastic case studies on the topic of twinning and sharing best practices from regional partnerships, followed by a Q&A session. We'll then wrap up the session with some reminders.
And before we get started, we have a few housekeeping notes. First of all, lines will be muted. So any questions you have, please go ahead and put them into the Q&A chat box. There's a little square down at the bottom. That's a speech bubble with a question mark on the inside, and that's where you're going to address any questions that you might have, and we will get to them. Closed captioning for this webinar is enabled for any interested parties, and additional resources, including a link to the recorded session, will be available 2 weeks after today. Finally, prior to each case study, we will ask our presenters to briefly introduce themselves, and then we will move on directly to the next case study once they're finished. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with our first presentation. Lorelei?
Thank you so much. I'm Lorelei Karimsky. I'm with the Association of Public Health Laboratories. I'm here today with one of my colleagues, Tina Sue, and then Brian Bernard is joining us from the Missouri Public Health Laboratory. I'm going to get started talking about regional consortia. Tina's going to talk a little bit more about the peer-to-peer perspective of the regional consortia, and then we're going to turn it over to Ryan to talk about his experience with the Iowa Public Health Laboratory. Next slide. So a little bit about regional consortia. So these are not formal networks. They are not defined in a mandate. They are not developed through any particular federal agency. What's unique about the regional consortia is it was actually a concept that was formed in the New England states back in the 1970s. And what they found was because they were serving a similar population in public health and were geographically in the same area, this gave them a great opportunity to build a relationship with each other, really to handle surge needs, emergency response, training, sharing of resources, leadership growth and development, as well as learning between each other. So APHL saw that model. We were looking at this in the 2000s, early 2000s. We saw this model with CDC as our partner, and we really wanted to encourage and see if there were others that would like to do something similar, which really led to the Northern Plains forming around 2006. So essentially over time, by the time we've gotten to about 2018, we had developed across the country 7 regional consortia. We pretty much got everybody covered in this. And so each of them set up their own priorities. Again, it's nothing mandated. It's something that they have done on their own. We are here to support what they do, but they have their own charters, they have their own priorities, they have their own call schedules. Sometimes they have memorandums of understanding, but it's really driven by them. And then we're here to support them in that role. I'm going to turn over to Tina to talk a little bit more about learning opportunities in the regional consortia.
Great. Thanks, Lorelei. Hi, everyone. My name is Tina Sue. I'm the manager of the quality systems side of quality systems and analytics under Lorelei. So just to continue on what Lorelei was saying, APHL assists regional consortia by identifying needs and resources and sharing outcomes and best practices with the larger public health laboratory community. So in the last year, we held 45 individual consortia conference calls and 4 quarterly joint calls. So that means that all of the regional consortia are invited to join those calls And those were to share what's happening across each consortium. We also supported travel for all 7 regional consortia to hold in-person meetings, because sometimes Zoom doesn't cut it, which hasn't happened since 2019. And we also supported before the pandemic. So there is peer-to-peer learning that is ongoing during these calls and in-person meetings, particularly when they have a topic that they want to discuss, like document control, responding to an outbreak. Maybe they have a new technology that they want to explore, and implementing a new method such as wastewater surveillance. So we provided funding for 14 peer-to-peer learning events. So this is where members from one lab can travel to another laboratory within their consortium to focus on a specific topic. And some of the examples of these trips focused on quality management practices, opioid biomonitoring, bioinformatics, whole genome sequencing, biosafety and risk assessments, and then finally emergency preparedness. So I'm going to turn it over to Ryan Bernard, who participated last year. He's going to talk about their peer-to-peer experience in the Midwest Consortium between the Missouri Public Health Laboratory and Iowa. Ryan, next slide, please. Thanks.
Thanks, Tina. Hi, everybody. My name is Ryan Bernard. As Tina said, I'm with the Missouri State Public Health Lab, and I serve as their administrative manager here, which liaisons between accessioning, mailroom, kit production, biohazardous waste, and hazardous waste. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so our peer-to-peer sharing took place in February 21 of 23, year 23. And as Tina said, so it was peer-to-peer sharing of the Missouri State Public Health Lab and the University of Iowa's Missouri, the State Hygienic Laboratory. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background and initiation of what took place for between Missouri State Public Health Lab and Iowa's Hygienic Laboratory. Missouri State Public Health Lab newly designed their accessioning department during COVID times. And we were really looking for best practices between their medical management system, which is Open Ellis for us, and then kit production to make sure we're in line with the Midwest Regional Consortia, and then as well as to ensure that we're utilizing our accessioning department at its maximum capacity. So as Tina noted, so she gave the proposed budget, and then we dictated what the scope of the travel was, and we were going. The staff numbers were all related to what was within the budget and how far we could go, but within the Midwest, since we're located here in Missouri. So Missouri started with looking at the Public Health Laboratory System database to then see kind of aligning operations. That peer-to-peer networking through common LIMS systems, common LIMS systems, operations, and testing. So we ended up landing on the State Hygienic Laboratory, and specifically with their support services section directed by Sherry Marine. And she acted between a liaison between myself and our Missouri State Public Health Lab's informatics manager. So next slide, please. So some of our peer-to-peer objectives were to share resources, services, information between Missouri State Public Health Lab and Iowa State Hygienic Laboratory. We were going to compare processes to potentially save money, reduce waste, build a pathway for information sharing, and to continue to grow and evolve technology advances within our public health information system. So again, kind of drilling down a little deeper here, the similarities between what we found between State Hygienic Laboratory and Missouri State Public Health Laboratory was a statewide courier operations. They had similar kits to inside of their support services section as Missouri State Public Health Lab, and they utilized Open Ellis, which was a good aligning factor, because what we know is that's inventory, that's kit production, that's pretty much everything that makes our world go around. So Sherry, Shannon, and I discussed, each of our expectations and the objectives that I just took place here, and then started discussing how we can minimize business impact, but still maximize the overall exposure for the team's involvement. And we wanted this to be collaborative for both parties. So opportunities for both teams to be able to discuss and interact. And that overall meant even discussing splitting up between multiple different divisions and then trying to capture as much in a few days as we possibly could. So we were hoping to gather a median specimen day, which ultimately landed on a Wednesday and Thursday for the week of the proposed review and observation scope. Each team, after we defined that scope, each team went back to their respective management members for their approval. At this point, we also reached out to APHL and Tina specifically to make sure we had the green light for movement on this. And then once we did, we could start coordinating that visit. Next slide, please. So as I noted, some of our focus areas were the support services section within the public health labs. So that included mailroom operations, staffing, kit components, inventory items, sterilization. It also included for both laboratories, accession operations and staffing, and then courier drop off. So depending on how your public health lab or your laboratory is structured, you may be a pickup, you may be the final drop off. So, but ultimately we wanted to, again, find the aligned factor where the last drop was going to be at the given location that we were inspecting. And then for informatics or bioinformatics, we were looking at the data entry team, and then specifically between a data entry and for environmental, clinical, and newborn screening. Next slide, please. Okay, so at the point of peer-to-peer sharing, so even more similarities that we noted during this peer-to-peer sharing was that our structures aligned extremely similar. The differencing of full-time equivalents was 27 to 29 across the laboratory within the support services section between data entry, informatics, and support services between the two laboratories. We also noted that specimen counts were found to be similar in nature and in volume for the locations. And so that's why we landed on Wednesday, Thursday for that option. Although I do want to note, even though although the FTE counts were similar, the positions differed in description and their statuses. So our responsibilities differed slightly, but overall our aligned objectives and missions were consistent between the two laboratories. And so they were found comparable. But the things that were noted though here was that State Hygienic Laboratory was ahead of Missouri State Public Health Lab's cross-function application. And so Missouri State Public Health Lab was, let's go to the next slide, please. Great. Okay. So the comprised of 22 FTEs versus 23, not including Ankeny, were similar in process and perfect for the external evaluation of processes. So basically the questions we were looking for is what's going well, what's not. And what Missouri State Public Health Lab lacked in cross-function applications, State Hygienic Laboratory showed strengths there. And there were specialized staff for kit productions, and it was discussed to have a plan for cross-training upon return to State Public Health Lab. So that kind of kicks us off into the first section that we looked at. So the support services for mailroom operations and staffing. So as noted, virtually equal to headcounts and kit components. Differencing observations between the expectations of the State Hygienic Laboratory were that their support services conducted necropsy pre-work, and then they also conducted kit production specialized staff. So they weren't shifting between multiple kits. They were specialized within their area. And additionally, there was so much cross-functional application to what their mobile staff could do. And so I wanted to note that So next slide, please. So upon arriving back, so this is kind of the lessons learned for Missouri State Public Health Lab. We took a look at our own internal operations and established a baseline of expectations across our support services function, and built a laboratory support advancement program. This training program is where interested employees can complete a series of tasks and proficiencies to cross train into other support series functions. If they do this, they earn a career ladder step and also help the mission of the laboratory for cross training in support of surge capacity. Next slide, please. So the next similarity that we were looking at was the support area between central accessioning. As noted, their specimen quantities were virtually equivalent. So some differencing that were noted were some differencing of on-site quantities, and upon digging deeper, they had State Hygienic Laboratory has multiple locations that they serve, and so that they although they were still getting those specimens, they were being tested at different locations. Another noting time was there was a start time difference of half an hour between what State Hygienic Laboratory does and what Missouri State Public Health Lab does. And then again, they were similar in scope of work. So another similarity noted was their statewide courier is statewide, but it's an on-demand pickup. So every order that's placed is individually tracked and monitored and received through the State Hygienic Laboratory. So there's no set pickups, whereas in Missouri State Public Health Lab, we have a set number of locations, so we have a set number of pickups and times. So it's a very predictable model, and so it's also consistent in funding that way too, as you can dictate when and how long pickups can last, right? Another differencing note here is that State Hygienic Laboratory had 100% accountability for all of their specimens being received at Iowa State Hygienic Laboratory. And this was above and beyond what Missouri State Public Health Lab could do. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So when we got back, Missouri State Public Health Lab took an internal review of what was going on within our courier system, and we knew the direction that Iowa had took is where we wanted to go with Missouri State Public Health Lab. So their staffing, although started earlier, our staff has that option. It was just discussed internally that the sustainability of that operation timeline was going to be difficult to maintain. So our last drop is at 4 a.m. in the morning here in Missouri, and our staff starts at 6 a.m. So with that, we started tracking and tabulating data for support of can we do what Iowa is doing? What we found was no, we cannot. If you can see all the red that's there, we were looking at variances between samples of anywhere of 7 all the way up to 87 specimen differences per drop off. Per day of drop off. It was astronomical. So having any type of predictive model related to what our day-to-day operations would be coming from the courier was not going to be a doable thing. During the time of the review, we were under a contract revision, and at that point, we started making adjustments to the contract to improve our specimen accountability. So as noted, we did finalize that contract, and it is in place now. So with the courier improvements that we put in place to mock State Hygienic Laboratories reconciliation process, we're now seeing a reconciliation of 94%. And that was last month at rollout. So we're only looking to improve at this point. It is noted that we cannot get as granular as what Iowa State Hygienic Laboratory is due to our jurisdiction within hygienic lab between local public health labs and where DHS Missouri State Public Health Lab align. Next slide, please. So the next location that we looked at was the support area and data entry. So what the team looked at here was environmental, clinical, and newborn screening specimens, and specifically data entry. So with us utilizing OpenELIS, it was found that we were nearly identical. Maybe some small nuances between the two locations, between how operations were held, but ultimately what was noted is that there were no differences that could be identified. And as far and digging deeper, there really wasn't any best practices that could be identified too. We were both utilizing OpenELIS to the capacity of what OpenELIS's operations allowed. Next slide, please. So what some lessons learned about the peer-to-peer sharing was to identify three main points, and it was clear, consistent communication, mutual respect and understanding, and shared vision and goals. You know, in order for the lab twinning partnership to be effective, communication between the two partners had to be clear, open, and consistent. This includes setting goals and expectations for the partnership, as well as regularly updating each other for the progress and challenges. It took us 4 months to finalize everything at initiation and identification between Iowa and Missouri. You know, being a good twin partner means showing respect for you and your partner's expertise, culture, and way of working. It's important to approach the partnership with an open mind and willingness to learn from each other. And then successful twinning partnership is built on shared vision and common goals. It's important for both partners to have a clean understanding of what they hope to achieve through the partnership and work together for those goals. You know, and I just want to note here that during the event that we did this peer-to-peer sharing, Iowa had experienced 4 consecutive winter events, all during the week after of what took place. It was kudos to Iowa State Hygienic Laboratory for allowing us to come down during that winter event and kind of see an extra layer of what took place during weather events. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, after we identified the funding 5 employees from Missouri State Public Health Lab were to observe the like processes and explore mirror processes of Iowa State Hygienic Laboratory. Missouri State Public Health Lab was able to leverage these lessons learned through peer-to-peer learning to better its agency and its partnership with Iowa. And then Missouri State Public Health Lab and the Iowa State Hygienic Laboratory have been able to utilize this peer-to-peer experience to leverage like parties for public health advancements. You know, again, this peer-to-peer sharing, it didn't end when we left. We've had consistent communication throughout since that time frame and as far as projects, career improvements, differences of operations, ideas, troubleshooting. It hasn't ended there. So I just want to note that it's once you establish this thing, it's like a good call down list for anybody that needs help. So Missouri has utilized Iowa and Iowa has utilized Missouri. Next slide, please. So I did want to note a special thanks here to APHL and Miss Tina Sue for helping fund and support of the public health mission to better public health and peer-to-peer sharing between Missouri State Public Health Lab and the Iowa State Hygienic Laboratory. Again, another special thanks to the Iowa State Hygienic Laboratory's management team, specifically Sherry Marine, and the team for helping coordinate and facilitate Missouri State Public Health Lab for 2 days. The experience was phenomenal and the staff was extremely welcoming. And then, you know, a special thanks to Missouri State Public Health Lab for allowing 5 employees to step away from their daily duties to take advantage of such a great opportunity. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, we'll move on to our next presentation, Jason and John.
Yes, hello. First of all, thank you to ASCP for inviting John and I to share our experience with twinning best practices. I'm Jason Holohan. I'm a public health lab scientist here at the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, Bureau of Laboratories. And I will introduce and explain the twinning experience that John and I were able to participate in. Then I will turn it over to him to share his experiences in the exchange. Next slide, please. So recently, APHL started organizing a training partners exchange. As parts of our role here in public health, John and I hold the title of Bioterrorism Training Coordinator, which comes with an education and outreach component. To better explain this exchange, I have put together a short video. So next slide, please. In 2023, to improve and enhance outreach and training provided by Public Health Laboratories, APHL piloted a Training Partners Exchange. For the first round of this exchange project, Michigan and Alaska were selected and paired together. The goals of the program are to give public health lab trainers an opportunity to spend time with a partner at their host laboratory to experience different approaches to training. To begin the exchange, Jason from the Michigan lab traveled to Alaska to meet John. John faces many unique challenges in laboratory training while covering the largest state in the union. During my visit, we were able to have in-depth discussions about training perspectives, approaches, and processes. Next, John took me to a regional hospital in Bethel, Alaska, which is in the western part of the state, to see his training approaches in action.
Hi, we're out here at the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta Regional Hospital in Bethel, Alaska, and we're going to be doing our pack and ship training and our wet workshop roadshow.
We joined the scientists at Yukon-Kuskokwim in their lab to deliver some hands-on training in biosafety and biothreat bacterial identification. The staff loved the practical training in biosafety cabinet usage and getting to see the biothreat bacteria in their own lab. Later, John made the return trip to Michigan. While Michigan isn't nearly the size of Alaska, I face many similar challenges in providing outreach to my rural partners spread throughout northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula. It was great to share ideas and learn best practices from John. So why are knowledge exchanges and sharing experiences important for laboratories? Well, we all have many roles that we take on in the lab, and it can often feel like you're juggling many hats all at once. People in positions like John and I, we jump back and forth from various roles, from safety to preparedness to education, and on and on and on. It can be a lot to take on. Next slide, please. And often it is difficult to accumulate all of the necessary knowledge before you take on a role such as this. They can't teach you everything you need to know in undergrad. So there are always new topics to master and new things to learn, and on and on and on. So we always have to do our best by our partners and patients. So sometimes this can feel like you're building the plane while flying, gathering knowledge and experience as you go. Next slide, please. One important thing is staying connected to professional organizations such as ASCP and APHL. Gaining new skills through these professional organizations is vitally important. And for me, having this experience with John and getting to slow down for a few days and observe another professional was a really great way to gather some of that knowledge. Next slide, please. So some lessons learned about how to be a good twinning partner. John and I both created action-packed schedules for each other during this exchange, but we also kept things open and flexible to see where our partners' interests took the discussion. We set aside plenty of time for feedback, so the exchange wasn't just one giant knowledge dump of, here's what I do and isn't that great? And since there is always so much going on in public health labs, we made sure to introduce our partner to various SMEs throughout the lab for additional points of view. And with that, I will turn it over to John. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. So I'm John with the State Public Health in Alaska, where I have been the biosafety officer for our laboratory, our state training coordinator, as well as the RO for our select agent program. So as Jason was saying, a lot of hats get worn by people in public health labs in our position. Next slide, please. So the training partnership has a lot of benefits, and some of it is to our own laboratories and to us personally in terms of professional development. I had the opportunity to go and learn from these other PHLs in ways that you just don't get when you're listening to webinars and conference calls. Like this conference call right now is fantastic, but actually interacting with your peers on a personal level does provide benefits that you just otherwise can't get. One of the cool things that I was able to do is, while I build up my own repertoire for how I conduct trainings with our Sentinel laboratories, I know that there's a lot of other methodologies that I haven't ever explored or never even knew about. And seeing Jason be able to put that into practice with his Sentinel laboratories was very eye-opening and very educational for me. We have very different skill sets and strengths, and it was cool to see how he built on his own strengths to deliver those trainings. And then one of the things that I found, particularly living in Alaska, where we're geographically isolated, we're in our own time zone, way far away from everybody else, is that it makes you feel very isolated. Like you have unique challenges and barriers that nobody else has. And once you have the opportunity to do a peer network training with somebody else, or go to a conference where there's a lot of other people, you find that you have a lot of common barriers and challenges. And once you see what the commonalities are, you can start to talk about ways that people have overcome those challenges and ways that you could utilize the same kind of programs or opportunities or skill sets to overcome those at your home state. And, it was just really important to kind of see that, like, whatever challenges I have, there are at least peers out there who have an understanding of the things I'm facing. And you may not get like perfect drop-in solutions, like Jason does something really awesome and I could just take that whole presentation and I could, with his permission, slap, Alaska Public Health's logos on it. That's not always the case, but maybe 80 or 90% of that same information I might be able to use, and I might be able to provide that as well. Next slide, please. The real benefit, I think, is to our clinical laboratories in our home states. Our own idea sharing means that we have collaborations, and I'm able to pick up these tools and pick up these ideas that can really strengthen the training program that I use within Alaska. And, it also just builds bonds in between states in general, because there's things that are happening in clinical laboratories in other states that, maybe I can bring back and I can introduce my own. What I found is that it allowed me to think beyond our typical DOT and IATA packaging and shipping training. That's kind of our, for me at least, it's my main buy-in to clinical laboratories. That's what gets me through the door. And knowing the breadth of trainings that other public health laboratories offer means that I can strengthen a total training curriculum that I provide within Alaska. I can think way beyond that packaging and shipping training, and I can look more at risk assessments. I can look more at training on bioterrorism organisms. I can look at in-lab training and biosafety and biosecurity. If you have a good training repertoire, go ahead and head back one. If you have a good training repertoire, there's always classes that other people can provide. And, you know, if you ask around within your peer network, you can probably find a training that you don't have, and maybe you were dreading trying to build. And then it's always important to remind your clinical laboratories that PHLs do have the ability to deliver in-person facility-specific training. And you know, that connection that we made, like I said, builds my own training repertoire, which gives me better opportunities to deliver high-quality training to clinical laboratories. Next slide, please. So here's my thoughts on what made a great exchange program. I felt like the best way to learn from your partner lab is to be honest about what you don't know and what you're not good at. And that allows you to talk about what you'd like to improve. I know sometimes it's really hard in a peer situation to say, like, I don't know something and I'm not good at something and I want to be better. And you really shouldn't feel embarrassed about needing, having areas that you definitely can improve. Also, in a peer situation, I went into it thinking, what do I have to offer? What do I bring to the table? Am I here to just learn, or am I here truly as a peer? And a peer network really shows you the strengths of your own facility, the strengths of your training program. You might actually be really good at something and you never thought about it before because it's common in every place, every day for you. So it can offer a lot of unique opportunities to show off your facility in ways that maybe don't seem spectacular or special to you. Definitely take time to show off your city and or state. This was my first time that I had ever been to Michigan, and so I really enjoyed the opportunity to go and see it. And it was the first time Jason had been to Alaska, so it was nice to actually see a little bit of a little more of the country. And make sure you discuss ways to adapt what you learned from your facility. Like I said, not everything can be a drag and drop solution. And so this can really allow you to plan together and collaborate to build stronger programs together. Next slide, please. And thank you very much.
Thanks for that presentation. Okay, Jill, Dr. Bean.
Hey, thank you, Allie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christine Bean. I work for APHL. I'm the Chief Learning Officer, and I'm here today with Jill Power to talk about a biosafety partnership that we worked on in New Hampshire when I was the state lab director there, and Jill was the biosafety officer. So we're going to show you some highlights of a regional training symposium, specifically on biosafety. Next slide, please. So for the Northeast, Lorelei mentioned the Neufeld Consortia. We have a long history in the Northeast with a regional consortia that came to be on late 70s, early 80s, mainly around newborn screening becoming centralized in the Northeast region. And when the partners began that consortia, they saw the value, so much value in it that it continued since then. It's been going on for a long time. Lab directors meet in person several times per year in the region. Examples of the work, I won't read through it all. Many things are worked on together, including sharing best practices, training programs, round robin PTs, drills and exercises. We do have EPA Region 1 in our Northeast region, and they participate in the consortia as well. Next slide, please. So the Neufeld biosafety officers are from 9 jurisdictions that are part of our regional consortia. And this group of people had worked together for a number of years, networking at the Neufeld meetings, working on shared trainings, doing outreach to Sentinel Labs and discussing how they're doing training and outreach, and also offering twinning opportunities in the region. And Jill, as the biosafety officer in New Hampshire, actually was twinned with the Mississippi biosafety officer and had an experience doing that. Next slide. So some of the roles of the biosafety officers with clinical partners include being a subject matter expert in the area of biosafety, so offering those services and trainings, a laboratory liaison, doing safety laboratory visits. So this is not an inspection or an official audit, but you can have someone who could come in and do a lab visit and give you some ideas on how to improve safety. Risk assessment reviews, conducting risk assessments, quality assessments, offering training opportunities, discussing products that are available, and communicating with partners through something called Health Alert networks and Health Alerts. So I'm going to turn it to Jill to talk about the specifics about the symposium we offered in 2018.
Hi, everybody. Next slide, please. So I'm Jill Power. I'm now retired from the New Hampshire Public Health Labs, but I was the quality manager and then moved into the biosafety officer position when the funding came about. And so with the consortia, we worked with my partners in the other state laboratories and local labs. And after doing the visits that we had been charged to do, which was to go to a lot of the clinical labs, and maybe some of you have had those visits, we decided that there was not enough talk about safety, specifically biosafety. So we decided to put our heads together. APHL had an innovation grant that was available for funding for this. And we put together the symposium. It was held in Massachusetts, which was centralized to our region. We had partners from CDC, obviously that's where the funding came from. Association, public APHL provided the grant and the access to that money. Because we didn't have as a region ways to register folks and put the message out that we were doing this, we had the local CLMA, Clinical Laboratory Management Association from New Hampshire and Vermont, and Massachusetts helped us with that registration. And then we also had vendors, local vendors. So if you decide to do this, you know, talk to your VWR or your Fisher or your Baker representatives to see if they can help it together. They were wonderful to have. It was a day-long session. We had over 100 people, and we did charge them a nominal fee just to make it rewarding enough for them to make it to the symposium. Next slide, please. So it was held in June of 2018. We probably started forming our thoughts on this in the fall of 2017. And some of the highlights that we came up with was an introduction to laboratory safety, laboratory acquired infections. We talked about biosafety, routine or general safety, which involved the environmental health and safety group. We went over safety risk assessments. Many of the labs had not even seen those before. We talked about laboratory security, and we also had some hands-on activities where they rotated from station to station. And then we had some networking. Next slide, please. So these were some of the rotating safety activities. We had a biological spill set up, a chemical spill, respiratory protection, and donning and doffing. So these are a few pictures from the symposium. And also as pictured is risk assessment. We went over that as well. A lot of people, like I said, had not done those before, didn't understand why it was important to do those. That's for another day. So next slide, please. So some of the lessons learned from people was that more programs like this are needed, specifically on safety. You know, we talk about quality a lot, but we don't really talk about safety. Participants identified safety improvements in their own labs. I think just by networking and talking to each other, meeting with one another, you know, how do you do this or how do you do that? And they were able to identify improvements to bring back to their own labs. They also learned how to develop a culture of safety. We went over, you know, how do you get buy-in from management and how do you put a team together? Biosafety officers are an available source to clinical partners, and they are, but also anyone in your public health lab is very willing to help out. So don't hesitate to reach out to the lab. They did learn again how to perform a safety risk assessment. And then from the regional laboratory partnerships, they learned they can support each other, especially troubleshooting any like regional natural disasters. What do you do during a snowstorm? How do your couriers get around? What are your other natural disasters like flooding? We've heard a lot about tornadoes recently, and also fires, and whatever's in your area, you can get together and collaborate on how do you manage those samples and maintain integrity. We also were participating in peer-to-peer lab visits and engaging in regionally relevant regulatory discussions. So a lot of talk is done on quality, but there isn't a lot done on safety. Most everyone has to follow the OSHA regulations, but how do you actually import those into your lab and manage those? That's the end of our topic here. So I'll turn it over to Allie.
Thank you, Jill. Okay, we're going to open it up for questions. We do have quite a few questions that have come in. Ryan, there's one that came in during your initial presentation, and I see Christine, Dr. Bean, that you've answered it, but I think it's a good question for everyone, and that is, what is the advantage of having regional consortia versus making a nationwide consortium wherein a wider array of ideas could be shared on the national level? So I think there's probably benefits to both, but I'll open that up to all of our presenters.
I can start with just what I dropped in the answer, if you don't mind. So I agree, Allie, that there's a benefit to both. But what I saw as a lab director from the regional consortia, you know what your regional partners' capabilities are, you know them personally, you've worked with them. And in events where you're in a surge event or you've had some kind of a natural disaster, we had an ice event in New Hampshire where our lab froze up and we were out of commission completely. We could utilize our regional partners pretty easily and transport specimens to them to do testing for us. So, really covering for each other when you have capacity issues.
I want to tag team to Chris's response too. We do quarterly calls where we allow the consortia, bring them all together. It's a great opportunity for them to share what's happening in their region and use those lessons learned for maybe what's going on somewhere else. So that's something that we try to do, is this continuum of conversation and knowledge sharing during quarterly calls. Thank you.
Really exemplary the way the public health laboratory community does this, because I think that the hospital-based laboratories could benefit a lot from doing similar things. And I think having been on that side much of my career, we don't do it enough. Does anyone else have a comment about that question that came in?
Yeah. So one of the things that I find really beneficial about a regional consortium is that you are able to partner with states that have similar size demographics or rural versus urban centers. And, from a very rural state, there are like big city problems that are really hard to translate locally. And there's also very rural problems that's very difficult to translate to more urbanized states. And so kind of having a partnership with people with that kind of similar balance makes idea sharing a lot more valuable.
I love that. I'm going to move on to another question. Ryan, I think in your presentation, you mentioned career advancement as part of the good side effects of your program. So just posing it to everyone on this panel, how do these partnership opportunities really enhance individuals' abilities to advance up the career ladder?
So I'll take the first step at this one. So what we did for this evaluation was we noticed that Iowa State Hygienic Laboratory had so many more functions on top of their group. It required us to redefine our internal positions. And we could leverage that then to create an opportunity of a promotion within the State Public Health Lab here in Missouri. That may not be consistent throughout. And I did have to sacrifice positions through evaluations of workloads, but ultimately, doing that peer-to-peer sharing brought to light how much more we can do. And that in turn evolved into more work equals sometimes more money.
Does anyone else have a comment about equating or relating career ladders to these opportunities that you have discussed?
I think just from participating with the other groups, you learn from each other. You bring that home, you share that with your home laboratory. I know it's a little difficult in the hospital labs. Some of them are, they're competing for business, but you still have to remember that you're all working together, trying to, help with the health of people or the environment. And anytime you can learn something new, that's great. And you just add that to your resume. I think I'm able to, say I went from the quality manager, I was at MedTech on the bench, went to the quality manager, and then the biosafety officer, the deputy lab director. So it can happen.
Just to chime in from a moderator's point of view, from my background in both public health and medical laboratory and now in academia, the hybrid nature of this work is so critical that it's informed and advanced my career for over 30 years. So if you're in a state that has a public health laboratory, which you should be across the country, and you are involved with an MLS or an MLT or even other allied health types of programs, there is a great benefit in you creating or investigating a partnership between those two entities. I can't emphasize how critical that is, especially now. The time is right to make this happen. So I would really encourage you to do so.
I think that segues well, Rodney, into the one of the questions in the chat that you actually answered, where someone said, can public health labs provide on-site training for MLS programs in colleges and universities? Does anyone else want to comment about that?
I can start. I'm sure there's a lot of comments on this. So what I've seen in public health is that a number of people do teaching and training. So a number of people working in public health laboratories are more than happy to go out to medical laboratory science, MLS, MLT programs and do course instruction. We had a number of people in New Hampshire to do that and enjoy doing it. Didn't charge anybody to do that, just come out and talk about, some of the work on molecular testing. I used to do a lot of laboratory management lectures. So reach out to your public health laboratory and ask them if there's people interested to help give lectures.
I would absolutely echo Dr. Bean's comments. Just two specific examples from my program. We invite the Department of Health in Austin, a couple of different laboratories that are difficult for us to handle even in a hospital setting. So for example, mycology. And really seeing that full breadth of work in mycology. They can bring samples, they bring prepared slides, they can talk about the public health's respect, how they work through that. They also do it for us for mycobacteriology, which we can't really dive into too deeply. And then to Christine's point, we also do some molecular stuff, but it's across the board: biosafety, preparedness, topics you may not think about in an MLS program that can be really beneficial to our students and their education.
And also as a lab director, I saw that as part of our a core function of public health. So if someone in the laboratory was requested to come do a guest lecture during the work hours, that was part of their job. They could go and do that work. It was part of their responsibility to do it.
That's career development as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can jump in. Just I know other people here at the Michigan lab do various guest lecture and speak to MLS programs. I know myself personally, I have good relations with several of the MLS programs here in Michigan. I've spoken about various things from just different career paths, as public health is kind of maybe a unique or interesting career path for MLS students. And I've also spoken on just the biothreat organism identification and various safety, kind of general biosafety, laboratory safety topics.
And as a pathologist, I hope our pathology residency programs are participating in this same type of education partnerships.
Yeah, I know we're beating it to death here, but again, the other piece of this, again, it's just such a critical thing is so many MLS and MLT students and perhaps other students still are needing to be educated about the fellowships and the internships, not just through CDC or APHL, but other research undergraduate opportunities that you might tie into a public health project. So, ask if you're not sure and reach out to different people. I'm sure everyone here would be happy to help if you are not familiar with this area.
I think we have time to take one more brief question. Of course, we can't have a session without some sort of question about COVID. So there was a question about the challenges in doing these peer-to-peer meetings or changes that had to be made during and after the COVID pandemic. I guess sometimes these can be advantageous and then sometimes disadvantaged. Does anyone want to comment on that?
I'll comment first. I can do it really quickly. So as many of us are aware, that funding is changing rapidly. And numbers, depending on what state you are, numbers may be dwindling as well because we're no longer under a pandemic status. So that's where, this peer-to-peer advantage is that you can get these cross-functional applications to continue to, utilize these employees to the best of their ability.
I'll tag team on with Ryan. One of the things that Tina and I noticed at APHL particularly was the travel restrictions that so many states had in place. So opportunity especially heavily during the pandemic, just wasn't an opportunity for them. They had to respond to the pandemic. They had to be focused on that. There was no travel. So heavily the focus with the peer-to-peer was what was happening in each of their areas, each of their states, and what was going on at the region and supporting each other through that. So that's what I noticed, but please others jump in.
I know for training in Alaska, despite its huge size, a lot of my training was actually in person prior to the pandemic. And so the pandemic did push me towards building a better system for delivering online or asynchronous training that I just didn't have very well built out before. One of the really cool things about the peer-to-peer, which was only last year, so it was a little bit late, is that Jason, his real strengths were in developing those kind of asynchronous presentations and programs that could be delivered remotely. And that was one of the benefits that I got from the program, is to kind of develop that skill set a lot more so that a lot more of our trainings could be delivered that way in Alaska.
Okay, well, I think that is going to take us to our wrap up here. Again, thank you to all of our panelists and all the in the audience who had great questions. As you have more of those or you find other commonalities, please feel free to share that with our team. So we've got a few upcoming opportunities and events that we'd like to share with you as we wrap up today's session. Our final webinar in the series will be on June 26th, so about a month and a half from now, featuring 2 fascinating case studies on clinical and public health laboratory partnerships, supporting effective data sharing within the context of both foodborne outbreaks and the influenza surveillance system.
And with support from CDC, ASCP has launched a laboratory workforce scholarship available to candidates from underrepresented groups and underserved areas of the U.S. who are looking to pursue higher education or specialization in the medical laboratory sciences. This scholarship application will close in 2 weeks, so please check it out and share this opportunity with any of those who may be interested. You can see the information here on the screen. And
yeah, what a fantastic opportunity that is, right? Be sure to share that with your students and with other program directors. As a reminder, we will also be offering 1 CMLE credit for this workshop webinar. Instructions will be mailed to attendees tomorrow via Zoom. Credit can only be claimed by live attendees within 1 month of the webinar date.
And if you have any questions at all that weren't answered during today's sessions, you can feel free to email us at grants, that's grant with S, grants@ascp.org. And with that, we'd like to thank you all for coming to today's webinar, and we encourage you to visit our website where you will find more information on all of these opportunities at supportcdc1lab.org. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.